Well, I wanted to thank you a lot for coming in today and talking to us at SISMEC, and we're looking forward to your talk later in the afternoon at CMES. But before, I wanted to talk about your work with Human Rights Watch, and if you could tell us more about what you've done with them and your recent trip.
Well, thanks for having me. I have been a research fellow at Human Rights Watch since September 2011, and I've been covering Bahrain since then, and also Kuwait for the past year. I first went to Bahrain in November 2011. That was when the government invited us for the first time in almost 6 months to go back, because we had been banned from going to Bahrain when the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry published its finding. So that was when I went for 2 weeks, and since then we were not allowed to go back to Bahrain. I personally applied since December 2011. I've been trying to get to Bahrain and applying for visa almost regularly every month, and finally we got a 5 days visa in mid-February or in late February this year. So a delegation of Human Rights Watch, 3 people, we went to Bahrain for 5 days and met with government officials and also representative of human rights groups and the opposition parties. And we had also a chance, the government approved a visit of the delegation to the jail prison where most of the prisoners of the demonstration of February and March 2011 are being held, and we had a chance to meet with 12 leaders of the protests, and also we had a chance to meet with one doctor who has been also sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, and also the president of the Bahrain Teachers Association, who has also been held or found guilty because for his participation in the demonstration, and also the human rights activist Nabil Rajab, who's currently serving a 2-year prison term for calling and participating in demonstrations in 2011. So that was the about the trip in recent months, or last month we went.
Okay. And in 2011, there was the independent inquiry that about human rights in Bahrain that had rather stern things to say about the nature of the prison system and what political prisoners were facing when they were detained. Has that changed much from what you saw in the jail prison?
Well, the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, or the BICI, what they found was, first of all, the commission was established by the king, basically under international pressure, to investigate what had the government response to the demonstration in demonstrations in February and March 2011, and during the period of the emergency law, which the government or the king imposed from March 14th, 2011 until June 1st, 2011. What the commission found was a really damning report about the government's response, which found out that the government had, or the security forces had committed a widespread violation of human rights against people, inmates, prisoners, and which many of them basically, or some of them, I think about 40 people died during that time. Some of them died as a result of torture in government custody. And what I think the most important part of the commission's report, which was about 500 pages, is the conclusion, which said specifically that the scale of the repression and violation that had been committed against the demonstrators could not have had happened without the knowledge of the higher people in command. That is the most important thing, which somebody high level or a bunch of military or civilians knew that was happening and they didn't prevent it. So that's and the commission also recommended a bunch of proposed a bunch of some recommendations. Among them was investigating and prosecuting people who were responsible for the human rights violation, including military and civilian high officials, and also reviewing the sentences or the conviction of people who have been charged with solely for participating in peaceful demonstration and also peacefully expressing their views. What happened definitely in November 2011, there was a momentum for the recommendation of the commission. The king accepted all of them and promised that they will work on them. It had definitely a terrible start because the commission asked for an independent commission that is consisted of both civil society, opposition, and the government to implement the recommendation. However, of course, most of the people there actually they were not really opposition. There were no civil society. So what was immediately and I think the other problem was basically the government implemented the recommendation. The government, which had been basically indicted by the commission for committing gross human rights violations. And what happened after a while, really the implementing those recommendations, also the government has implemented some of them, really lost momentum. The key part or the key recommendation, which is investigating and prosecuting high-level officials, that has not happened. And during this visit we went to Bahrain, they clearly told us they have not investigated. They have not found anyone guilty in high level. The highest they had found to be responsible was, someone at the Ministry of Interior who was responsible for about, I think the highest one was responsible for about 100%. And these are the highest. So definitely in that regard, Bahrain has done basically almost nothing in terms of bringing people to justice.
If top military officials and top civilian officials knew about this, did other governments know about what was going on?
Well, and yet they're getting away with it, seems like, at least on the Bahraini side. Bahrain is a very important country for the U.S. national security. It's where the Navy's Fifth Fleet is based, and about 15,000 troops. And it is basically one of the few countries that has been labeled as a major, basically, U.S. non-NATO ally. And the location of Bahrain, which is right across Iran, and where all the not only trade that's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, an oil route, is also where it's a post where U.S. can basically keep an eye on Iran, in addition to other bases that the government or the U.S. government has. In terms of the U.S. involvement in Bahrain or response, in February and March 2011, and actually even until May 2011, the U.S. was very much involved. And in many statements, the U.S. government called on the Bahraini government to respect the right of the people, so for peaceful demonstration and response to their demands. So it was pretty vocal. And in fact, when the leaders of the protests were in jail, Obama mentioned that. He said, how can you cannot have a genuine negotiation when the leaders whom you are supposed to talk to, they are in prison. So this is on the record and publicly say that. But after that, but in the past year, I think the U.S. has been, although I'm sure they are involved, but in terms of publicly being on the record, it's less than what it used to be. They are still talking about, for example, their disappointment with the prison terms for the protest leaders, stuff like that. But in terms of being vocal, like how they talk about other regimes in the region, it's definitely a different situation. I think probably this would be a good question for the U.S. government. I probably they might still believe like a diplomacy and talking, in private might help. We still have to see evidence for that. As for Saudi, the Saudi definitely has a major influence and stake in Bahrain. It's very close to Saudi. It's about, there's a causeway that connects Bahrain to Saudi. In terms of family marriage, the royal family is basically has a really close relationship with the Saudi regime, and Saudi has major financial stake there, and also that the composition of the ethnicity or the sectarian composition of Bahrain will have major impact on the domestic politics in Kuwait, in Saudi, because majority of the citizens or people in Bahrain are Shia, and from Saudi's point of view, if anything happens in Bahrain, it will have influence on Saudi because of the eastern province where Kuwaiti has a lot of resources in it is eastern province, and majority of them are Shia. So that's what Saudi is basically looking at the situation in Bahrain. In addition to that, if Bahrain falls, if what the demonstrators are calling for is a constitutional monarchy, with the king promised, in 2001, if that will happen, it might have a domino effect on other monarchies in the Gulf area. So that's where the situation is right now. To what extent, other governments knew about what was going on? I'm sure it wasn't. They knew what was going on in Bahrain, and these are, all these violations we are talking about, and Biki report found they had been reported by human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, before. So what really Biki, the conclusion that the Biki report reached, it was not different from what Human Rights Watch has reached. What Biki did was, in addition to writing for us 50 pages to reach to this conclusion, they wrote a 500-page, more details, more case analysis and narrations or narratives of the cases. So I'm absolutely sure that other governments knew what was going on, and probably they had more details than most of us had. And how they dealt with, definitely that's the question. Why they dealt with it the way they did, also a good question. Bahrain, in fact, I argue Bahrain was the only country where at some point literally almost half of the country poured into the streets demanding reform in the country. In Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, we didn't have that kind of demonstration. We are talking about 200,000 people going to the streets demanding, reform and some of them regime change. And unfortunately, yet these are the same people until this day they're protesting, and unfortunately we have seen more and more in recent probably months violent or clashes between protesters and demonstrators, because there is a sense of frustration and disappointment that a really peaceful protest might not, get the results they want.
In the West Bank, that the Palestinian Authority is heavily criticized for what happens in their jails, but that people extend that critique to the people who trained the Palestinian security forces, namely the European Union and American military units. In Bahrain, who trained the security forces, and is that the Gulf Cooperation Council or the United States with their military presence there?
That's a good question, and I don't really have a a response for that. But what Bahrain has, and is different from many of the other countries, is majority of the police forces are not Bahrainis. Bahrain, and that was one of the recommendation or conclusion of the BQ report was, the sense of urgency, like you should have a national army, because most of the members of the police and security forces are Pakistanis, some of them Iraqis, Jordanian, Yemenis. So Bahrain doesn't really have, and this, the last trip we were in Bahrain, when we asked, for example, how many of the police forces are diversity within the police forces. We do know that Bahrain is, if you look at the major components of Bahrain, or Sunni and Shia. I mean, when we asked about that, for example, how many are Shia in the police forces, they didn't have an answer. They said, well, we have, but well, how many? What is the percentage? They're like, we never asked those questions. Which in that case is really problematic, because when you try to police or protect people, you have to have that sense of diversity within the security forces. And again, that's one of the issues that the BK report found out. What they have done since the BK report came out was they hired a police commander from Miami and one from Scotland Yard, I think, John Yates and John Timoney, to basically, and they have done a lot of training for police forces. What for us as human rights groups, and which is, the problem is not about the rules. The problem is about the practice, and that's what is happening right now. Okay, and people are getting away with it. It's true, since the BQ report, now police forces, or they have, for example, installed cameras in police stations, in interrogation rooms, so they know what's going on. And since then, we are getting less reports or about police abuses in police stations. What is happening last year, we found out, and this year during a trip I met with people, is police now are beating people outside the police stations. So when they are arrested, on the way to police station, they beat them, sometimes, like amounts to torture, and then they give them to the police stations. And when they arrive there, they're treated well. And that's what's happening, and probably I think it has happened in other countries in the Middle East before. And that is what is not being investigated so far. And that's what is, again, that's the problem. When we had meetings with the government official, they were talking about, like, well, everything on the book is how to use, for example, a shotgun, how to use tear gas canisters, which we have reports, or we have cases people have died from them. So for them is, for example, if it's written you have to use your shotgun, or tear gas gun on 45 degrees or 90 degrees, that's it. That's the end of the story. There are rules, but again, for us, it's about the practice, which people or security forces are basically practicing, or beating people without accountability, and that's the problem. But again, the major issue with the problem with Bahrain probably is that sense of the lack of representation of all components of the society in those important national institutions such as the army or the security forces.
Why doesn't the political process solve the problem of unequal representation in Bahrain? Why not just go to the polls and vote for change?
But I believe because the opposition, they have tried that before, and they tried that in 2000 and since 2005, or some of the major opposition groups. What they are complaining about is gerrymandering of the electoral districts in a way that no matter how hard the opposition, which the major opposition group is the Shia group, how hard they try, they cannot get the majority of the parliament. From what I heard, the last election, for example, Al-Wifaq, which is the main opposition group, I think they got twice as many votes as all other groups that are represented in the parliament, but when they went to the parliament, they were still the minority. So the government has set up the districts in a way that the opposition, which again, most of them are Shia, they cannot get the majority of the parliament. And even if they get the majority of the parliament, they are still, they cannot basically bring about major changes because after the parliament, any law that the parliament is passing, there is the Shura Council, which is like a senate, all which is appointed. The members are appointed by the king. So these laws that or legislation that the parliament passes, the Shura can easily reject them. So many of the opposition group they argue that even trying to go through the political process, election and parliament and legislation changing will not really, or so far has not bring about the change they want, and that's a problem that has to be addressed.
So the latest development in the political process, I guess, is the national dialogue that's happening right now that some say is already, it's off to a rocky start. Is that because of these political problems that you're talking about now, or how is the national dialogue?
This is the second time they are trying. I mean, the first national dialogue happened in 2011 in July, which the government sponsored it, and the problem with that one, that first round was the government wanted everyone from the society, they said, to participate. So you had almost 350 representatives. So it basically was a mess. And the bigger problem was the opposition group got about 35 seats of 350 delegates. So these were like the major opposition, which they are directly affected or impacted by, and the events. They were like almost 10%. So they withdrew from the dialogue. Now they started another round. It's smaller, but the opposition is, if you look at the number, is still a minority group, because there is the opposition group, there is a representative from the government, representative from the opposition of the opposition, which these people are basically pro-government opposition to the group, and you have from the parliament. So the opposition is still a minority actually in terms of number, but it's basically a step forward compared to the one in 2011. The problem they have had in the past few weeks is the issue of the representation of the ruling family. Unfortunately, until now, the ruling family has been trying to convince the world or outside world that the problem is not the people's problem is not with the ruling family, it's between the people themselves, and they have said that in that terms. So, and what that really gives I think there is a sectarian tone in that this is a problem between Sunni and Shia. We are just here, we are trying to unify the country. And so there has been several sessions, in fact, so far about that representation, or someone from the ruling family needs to be in this meeting, and they haven't reached any agreement so far. And I think probably the big also other question is, okay, it's true, for example, the major opposition party or group, which is Al-Wifaq, is represented, and they are participating along with a few other opposition groups, but you also have, for example, leaders of these parties and some of other parties who are not registered in prison. And again, if you want to have an inclusive political solution, which everyone agrees that the problem in Bahrain has to come through a political solution, well, why you are still imprisoning or jailing leaders of the protests and political groups that could help you, in fact, address the situation and probably find a solution. And that's probably would be one of the major weaknesses of this dialogue. And again, it's too early to conclude or to assess the national dialogue, but it's again up to a rocky start. From what I have heard from people, and when I was in Bahrain, people didn't really have a lot of hope. For this, and again, for basically two major reasons, are the lack of the representation of the ruling family, and also actually from when the government announced that the government also was unwilling to participate in the negotiation. The government said it was a moderator and facilitator for the negotiation or the dialogue. So everything is between the people. They will solve their issue. They will come to us, and we will help them. Just ignoring the fact that that the government is the major stakeholder and the main responsible for what is happening in Bahrain, for years. So now the government is participating, but again, the other two major issue would be the weaknesses of the dialogue is the lack of someone from the ruling family to participate, and also that the fact that up to now, the leaders of the demonstrators are still behind bars. One thing has happened in the past few weeks is that the king appointed the crown prince, which still has a lot of respect from the opposition and other people, as the first deputy of the prime minister. And I think that's hopefully it will be a good sign. And one other thing I would like to talk about is a lot of problem Bahrainis have talked about, and is the fact that Bahrain has had one prime minister since it got independence in early 70s. So the prime minister has been there for almost, since 1970 something until now, the same prime minister. So there is not a lot of change in the government. That's what they believe. And when they started, in fact, the demonstrations started. That was one of the main demands, that there has to be an elected government, and this needs to be some change in the government.
Okay.
So I wanted to thank you for talking to SISMEC today, and I wish you good luck with your speech later this afternoon, your good work in Bahrain and Kuwait with Human Rights Watch. And thanks again for talking to us.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.